Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's victim story, I know it's annoying, but I need to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel here. I'm a new and small channel on YouTube, as you can see, and a simple click on the like button can help me a lot. So please subscribe to support me, click the like button and leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. Now, let's get to the case. The sun hung low over Oahu's north shore, casting a golden glow over the water. Emily Parker stood on her paddleboard, poised and balanced, her body in sync with the rhythm of the ocean. The warm breeze tugged at her hair, and the soft swish of waves against the board created a calming symphony. It was her favorite time of day, the stillness of the morning before the crowd arrived, when the beach was all but deserted, save for a few surfers and early risers. Perfect day, Emily whispered to herself, adjusting her stance. Her board was steady beneath her feet as she paddled further out, just beyond the reef where the water deepened. She was an experienced paddler, and her movements were fluid, practiced. A ballet on the ocean's surface. A few hundred yards away, the North Shore's jagged coastline rose up like a sleeping giant. The waves were gentle, not the sort that surfers flocked to, but just right for a morning of peaceful exploration. The distant sound of crashing surf on the outer reefs was muffled by the soothing motion of the water. In all her years of paddleboarding here, Emily had never felt anything but safe. The North Shore was known for its shark sightings, but she wasn't worried. There hadn't been a serious attack in years. Besides, she wasn't far from shore, just within range where she could still make out the figures of surfers in the distance. She glanced over her shoulder, seeing the beach stretching out behind her. The sandy expanse was nearly empty, save for a few joggers and early risers. The ocean ahead looked inviting, vast and endless, stretching to the horizon like an invitation to something beyond. "Don't get too cocky, Em," she muttered to herself. The self-reminder came from her own instinctual caution, an awareness that she never let go of, even in her comfort zone. As a seasoned ocean lover, Emily knew the ocean had a way of surprising you, catching you off guard when you least expected. Emily's board floated gently as she paddled, letting the waves take her further out. She enjoyed the solitude, the quiet rhythm of paddling in time with the water's pulse. Her movements were slow, deliberate, each stroke pushing her further into the deep blue. The deeper she went, the more she felt the pull of the ocean, like it was calling her to something she couldn't explain. "All right, time to turn around," Emily said out loud, the weight of her own words suddenly snapping her out of her trance-like state. She looked back toward the shore, assessing the distance she had traveled. It had been a good ride, nothing too daring, nothing that made her feel uneasy. But it was time to head back before the day got too hot, before the swell of people began to crowd the beach. She shifted her weight to pivot the board, turning it toward the shore. A soft wave crested beneath her, and she paddled with smooth, steady strokes, feeling the board glide effortlessly through the water. Her eyes remained focused on the shore as she paddled, but out of the corner of her eye, she saw something dark, pass just beneath the water's surface. It was quick, a fleeting shadow, nothing more. She dismissed it immediately as a passing fish, or perhaps the shadow of a passing boat. "It's probably nothing," she reassured herself, but the momentary shift in the water seemed to prick at her subconscious. Her paddle slowed ever so slightly, her focus flickering from the shore to the ocean around her. She felt the faintest pulse of unease, but dismissed it again. This was her home turf. She'd paddled these waters countless times. Suddenly there was another disturbance, this time more pronounced. The surface of the water rippled in a wide circular pattern. It was like a subtle change in the current, a little rougher than the rest of the water, like a gentle underwater push from something larger below. Emily's heartbeat quickened. She paused for a moment, her paddle resting in the water as she scanned the depths beneath her. It was hard to see through the crystal-clear waters. Only a faint, darkened silhouette shifted below the surface, but it was gone before she could make out any details. She told herself it was just a fish, just a shadow. "Get a grip, Em," she thought, shaking her head. Her paddle resumed its steady rhythm, but now she was more aware, hyper-aware, of the water around her. Her instincts, honed by years of ocean experience, seemed to be buzzing with a heightened alertness. She paddled a little faster, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in the back of her mind. As she pushed forward, A sudden splashing noise startled her. The water around her rippled wildly. Emily froze, her body stiffening on instinct. Her breath caught in her throat as she glanced nervously down into the water. For a moment, everything around her seemed to slow down, as though the world had paused just to watch. Then, without warning, a massive surge of water hit her from behind. The board tilted violently beneath her feet, and before she could react, Emily was thrown off balance. Her body splashed into the water with a sickening thud, the cold, shocking embrace of the ocean enveloping her. Her legs kicked instinctively, reaching for the board, but it was gone, knocked away by a powerful surge from below. Her heart raced as she tumbled in the water, her mind reeling. Panic began to set in, but she fought it back. "Stay calm, stay calm, stay calm," she told herself, kicking her legs to stay afloat. Through the chaos of her mind, one thought pierced sharply. Where's the board? She twisted her body around, searching the surface, her eyes scanning frantically for the familiar outline of her paddleboard. But there was nothing, just endless blue, stretching out on all sides. The sun shone relentlessly down from above, but it felt distant, irrelevant, as if she was no longer tethered to the shore. The water churned around her, colder than she remembered, and something deep in her gut told her it wasn't just the ocean's currents. Another wave surged beneath her, and for a moment she thought she saw something. A shape, a massive shadow, moving in the water beneath her. It was too large, too fast to be a fish. Her breath caught in her throat as the shape moved closer, dark and menacing. Emily's heart began to race, her mind suddenly flooded with fear. Her eyes were wide with panic, and her body went stiff as the shadow circled her, coming closer and closer, as if it was tracking her movements. "No," she thought, the word repeating in her mind, a mantra that she couldn't seem to shake. "No, no, no." Then it appeared. A dark, menacing fin sliced through the water just feet from her, sharp and deliberate. Her heart stopped as she stared, paralyzed by the realization, the unmistakable dorsal fin of a shark. Her breath hitched in her throat. There was no time to scream, no time to panic. Instinct kicked in and Emily flailed, kicking furiously as she tried to swim to get away, but the shark moved faster than she could. It was too close, too fast. She could feel its presence all around her, lurking beneath the water, its movements calculated and deliberate. The shadow moved in, its form growing larger in the murky depths below. Emily screamed, a desperate, raw scream that was swallowed by the ocean as her legs kicked furiously to try and swim back toward the shore. But there was no escape. Only the cold, brutal certainty of the predator circling beneath her, waiting. The peaceful rhythm of Emily's paddle strokes was interrupted by a sudden splash, a wave that came out of nowhere. It wasn't much, just enough to catch her off guard. The board tilted beneath her and her feet slipped, sending her off balance. In a split second, her body was no longer in control, and she was plunging headfirst into the water. Coldness enveloped her, and the surface tension gripped her as if trying to keep her down. She surfaced quickly, sputtering. Her heart raced, the shock of the cold water cutting through her calm like a knife. The salt stung her eyes as she wiped, her face gasping for air. She didn't panic. She had fallen off her board countless times before. But the water felt different today, more vast, more open, as if the ocean itself was alive, watching. Her board was floating a few feet away, its leash still attached to her ankle, tugging gently against the current. She took a moment to steady herself, treading water with slow, deep breaths, trying to shake off the disorientation. She wasn't far from the shore. In fact, she could still see the faint outlines of the people on the beach, small but visible. The horizon beyond, however, seemed to stretch forever, a vast, endless blue that made her feel small and insignificant. "All right, Emily, you've got this," she muttered under her breath, her voice hoarse from the cold. She glanced at her board, considering her options. It wasn't far and the water was calm. She just had to get back on. But then, as if answering her thoughts, a shadow flickered beneath the surface. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. Just a flicker in the corner of her vision, a disturbance beneath the water that tugged at her attention. Emily froze, instinctively looking down. The water below her was murky, the sun's rays not able to penetrate deeply enough to give her a clear view. The shadow moved again, faster this time, a dark shape that seemed to glide effortlessly through the depths. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't noticed it before, hadn't heard the faint splashing of the fin as it cut through the water. But now, as her body tensed, she realized that the deep, quiet water was no longer a peaceful place. It was a hunting ground. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning, and she couldn't stop herself from scanning the water frantically, her eyes wide with panic. No, 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 she thought, shaking her head as if willing herself to dismiss the fear. The water was calm, the waves gentle. There was no need to worry, but the shadow appeared again, larger this time, closer. Her heart pounded harder, her throat dry, and for the first time the water felt suffocating, heavy, pressing, inescapable. The faint ripple of the current could no longer mask the predatory presence lurking just beneath her. She grabbed for her board, her fingers slipping on the slick surface. The leash tugged at her ankle, pulling her back toward it. But she couldn't shake the feeling of something watching her. The shadow was almost on her now. It was moving fast, and it wasn't the kind of fish she was used to seeing. No, this was different. This was something big. Her breathing quickened. A deep, instinctive part of her told her to climb onto the board, get out of the water, get to safety. But the ocean, vast and cold, held her in its grip. Come on. Come on, she muttered to herself, her voice barely above a whisper as she struggled to pull herself toward the board. The shadow was closer now. She could see its form, sleek, fast, and unmistakable. The fin rose from the depths, a dark triangle cutting through the surface of the water like a knife. It was unmistakably a shark. Her eyes went wide, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stretch. The shark's presence was undeniable now, and terror surged through her veins. Her body went stiff, every muscle locked in place as she tried to push the panic down. She had read about sharks before, had even seen them during her time on the north. Sure, but this was different. This wasn't just a glimpse of something in the distance, this was real. This was now. Her mind raced. She couldn't remember the last time she had been this far from the shore. She had no idea how far out she was, but the beach seemed so far away, so unreachable. The shore, once a reassuring sight, now felt like a faraway dream. She wasn't just in deep water, she was in the domain of a predator, a place where she was the prey. A flash of silver broke through the water's surface. The shark's body surged toward her, its sleek, powerful form rising from the depths, cutting through the water with terrifying speed. She couldn't see its eyes, but she felt them, cold, calculating, watching her with intent. Her heart hammered in her chest as the shark drew closer. She was too far from the shore, too exposed. Her limbs felt heavy, as if the water itself was holding her down, weighing her thoughts, slowing her movements. She tried to call out, but her voice caught in her throat. In that instant, panic took over. She grabbed for her paddle, scrambling, but the shark was already moving in for the strike. Its body undulated gracefully, the power in its movements undeniable. It was a tiger shark, recognizable by the pattern on its skin, its large, muscular body designed for speed and strength. The predator's jaws were wide, ready to snap. Emily screamed, the sound lost in the vastness of the water. She kicked desperately, pushing herself away from the board, but the shark was faster. Her heart was in her throat as she saw the beast's mouth open, rows of sharp teeth gleaming under the water. The shark's massive body twisted in a fluid motion, closing the gap between them in a heartbeat. It was upon her before she could even process what was happening. Its teeth were a blur of white, and in one swift motion it lunged forward, biting into her leg with a force that felt like nothing she had ever experienced. Pain shot through her body, blinding and intense. She screamed again, her voice drowned by the roaring of the ocean around her. Her body went rigid with shock. The shark's teeth pierced her skin, dragging her down into the depths. The world spun, and for a moment she couldn't tell where the water ended and the pain began. But the next thing she knew, the shark released her. It wasn't finished. It had just begun its attack. The world blurred around her. She tried to swim, tried to push through the agony, but everything felt impossibly heavy. The ocean, once so welcoming, now felt like a trap, an inescapable place where the laws of nature were harsh and unrelenting. Through the haze of pain and fear, she Heard voices, distant at first, then louder as they drew closer. "Help! Help!" she screamed, though her voice was weak, barely a whisper above the sound of the crashing waves. And then, as if responding to the desperation in her voice, she felt the pull of the current change. Someone was there. A figure appeared above her, and a hand reached down, gripping her tightly. "Hold on, we're getting you out of here." She didn't know who it was. All she could focus on was the sharp pain in her leg, the red water swirling around her, and the fading sound of the shark's fin slicing through the waves as it disappeared back into the depths. The stillness of the water around Emily felt unnatural. The rhythmic sound of her breath was the only thing she could hear, the only thing that grounded her. But as she turned her head to locate her paddleboard, she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. A shadow beneath the surface, large, moving with a quiet precision. It was unmistakable, a shadow that wasn't a reef or a school of fish. Her stomach tightened. The water, once serene, now felt ominous. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. "It's probably just a sea turtle," she whispered to herself, trying to push the fear down. But her instincts screamed otherwise. The shape was too big, too deliberate. It wasn't the languid glide of a turtle or a distant fish. Something was in the water with her. Her gaze darted around, searching for movement in the surface, but the ocean seemed deceptively calm. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She looked toward the shore, where people were still too far away to notice anything was wrong. Her breath came quicker, her pulse now pounding in her throat. She needed to get back to the board, get out of the water, but the current had shifted slightly, pulling her further away. It was then that she felt it, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift beneath her feet. She froze. Beneath the surface, something was moving. It was a shift in the water, like the space around her had grown heavier, darker. Emily's heart raced as she instinctively kicked her legs, trying to move closer to her board. But the tension in the water, the presence of something large moving underneath her, slowed her every movement. Her eyes snapped to the surface just in time to see a flash of grey, a sleek, muscular shape cutting through the water with alarming speed. Her breath caught in her throat and her mind went blank. She knew exactly what it was, a tiger shark, a large one. She could see its dorsal fin rising out of the water, the dark, menacing shape slicing through the surface. The shark was circling, its movements deliberate, calculating. Emily's mind scrambled to understand what she was seeing, to process the danger she was in. Tiger sharks were known to frequent these waters, but the likelihood of an attack was so rare. She had read about it, heard about it, but nothing had prepared her for this, for the primal, raw fear of seeing one in the wild, so close, so real. Panic surged through her, a raw, desperate need to escape. Her eyes flicked to the shore again, but the distance between her and safety felt insurmountable. She could see a few people walking along the beach, but none of them were paying attention to her. No one knew she was in danger. Her hand shot out to grab her paddleboard, but before she could reach it, the shark darted beneath her, a flash of silver and muscle. She felt the water around her swirl, the immense power of the predator moving just below the surface, so close she could almost touch it. She froze, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain the shark could hear it. Then in an instant the shark was gone. The water went eerily quiet, the surface still again. Emily's breath came in shallow, rapid bursts as she waited, eyes scanning the water. Was it gone? Was she safe? She didn't dare move, her body rigid, unwilling to give in to the terror. That crawled up her spine. But then the surface broke. The shark surged upward from beneath her, its massive jaws opening wide, teeth glinting in the sunlight. The attack was sudden, brutal. The force of the strike was like nothing Emily had ever imagined. The shark's mouth clamped around her leg, its teeth sinking deep into her flesh with a sickening crunch. Pain exploded through her body, and she screamed, the sound lost in the vastness of the ocean. Her hands shot down to where the shark's jaws were locked onto her, her fingers desperately trying to pry them open, but the grip was unyielding. The water around her turned a deep red, the sharp sting of her injury mixing with the shock of the attack. "Help!" she screamed, her voice hoarse, barely audible over the rush of water. She kicked with all her strength, hoping to dislodge the shark. But it was like fighting against a wall of solid muscle. It didn't let go. Instead, the shark twisted, pulling her under with terrifying force. The pressure in her leg was excruciating, and the world spun in a dizzying whirl of light and dark. Her vision blurred, but she could still feel the shark's presence, the weight of it beneath her, the sheer violence of its power. Her mind raced, but it was as if the ocean itself was trying to swallow her whole. She wasn't sure how much longer she could hold on. Her body was going numb, her breaths coming in short gasps. She could feel herself sinking, the weight of the water pressing down on her chest, and yet she couldn't break free. Then, in one swift motion, the shark released her. The force of the release sent her spiraling upward, gasping for air as she broke the surface, her body trembling uncontrollably. Blood churned in the water around her, and she quickly realized the full extent of her injury. The pain in her leg was unbearable, but she didn't have time to think about it. She couldn't stop moving. She needed to get out of the water. The board, her only hope of escape, was still just out of reach. Desperation surged within her. With every ounce of strength she had left, she kicked toward it, the blood from her leg staining the water, making her vulnerable. She could hear the shark circling beneath her, but she refused to look. Every instinct screamed at her to swim, to paddle, to survive. Her hand reached out again, fingers brushing the edge of the board. She grabbed it and pulled herself up, using the last of her strength to hoist herself onto it, her injured leg hanging limp in the water. The moment she was back on her board, a cold wave of relief washed over her. She hadn't escaped yet, not fully up base, but she was closer. She could feel the shark circling beneath her, just out of sight, waiting for another chance. Emily didn't dare look back. The shoreline was still too far, the people still too far to help. But her body moved on instinct, and with trembling hands she began to paddle, slow, careful strokes, fighting through the pain and fear. She didn't know how long it took to reach the shallows, but when her feet finally touched the sand, the weight of exhaustion hit her like a tidal wave. She collapsed onto the beach, coughing and gasping for air, the sounds of the water and the distant cries of seagulls echoing in her ears. Minutes passed before she managed to sit up, her mind spinning with the events that had just unfolded. The reality of what had happened was still sinking in. She had survived, but just barely. And then, as if the ocean had decided to let her go, the water went still. The shark, the danger, all of it, disappeared into the depths. Emily was alone, on the shore, bloodied, broken and trembling, but alive. And then, somewhere far off, the sound of a helicopter. The search and rescue team had arrived. Emily's breaths were coming in shallow gasps, her body trembling despite the warmth of the sun. Her eyes never left the water below, scanning for any sign of movement. The shadow beneath her had vanished, but the heavy silence that followed it only deepened her unease. Every part of her being screamed that something was wrong, that the ocean was no longer a welcoming, peaceful place. "Stay calm. Just stay calm," she whispered, trying to steady her thoughts. She glanced at her paddleboard again, still just out of reach. The leash attached to her ankle felt like a lifeline, yet the distance between her and the board seemed to grow with every passing moment. The water around her, once clear and inviting, now felt thick with tension. Her instincts screamed for her to move quickly, to get back to the board and paddle back to the safety of the shore. But the strange, nagging feeling in her gut told her to be still, to wait, to keep her eyes locked on the water and wait for something, anything, to give her a clue as to what was happening beneath the surface. Then she heard it. A sharp, splashing noise from behind her, like something large and powerful was breaking through the water. Emily's head snapped around, her eyes wide with panic. For a brief moment she saw it, a large dorsal fin cutting through the water, its shape unmistakable. Her stomach dropped, and her blood ran cold. No, a tiger shark. It was bigger than she expected, its body a dark shadow gliding just beneath the surface, the white underside of its belly visible as it moved with terrifying purpose. Emily's heart thundered in her chest. her breaths ragged as she instinctively kicked her legs harder, trying to close the gap between herself and the board. Her movements felt clumsy, sluggish. The water was too vast, the distance too far. The shark's movements were fluid, almost casual, as if it hadn't even noticed her yet. But Emily knew better than to think it was uninterested. Every fiber of her being told her that this was not the kind of animal you want to let get too close. She had read about shark attacks. She had heard the stories. But nothing could have prepared her for the stark, terrifying reality of seeing the predator so close, so impossibly close, in the water, stalking with the precision of a hunter. Her legs kicked faster, but her body felt heavy, her muscles screaming with exhaustion. She needed to make it to the board. Get there. Get there. The leash jerked at her ankle, the only thing tethering her to her board, but the shark's movements were quicker, more deliberate now. She saw the fin rise again, slicing the surface of the water in a smooth arc. The predator was circling her. It was aware of her, and it was getting closer. A cold dread filled her chest, and she realized with horror that she wasn't just drifting in the water anymore. She was now a part of the food chain. Her thoughts screamed at her to panic, to flail and scream, but Emily held herself together, forcing every ounce of training and calm she could muster into her body. She had to be smart. She had to act. Don't thrash. Don't let it see weakness. Her body screamed at her to move, to get away, but every movement felt like it was drawing the shark closer. She needed to get her balance, to keep her head above the surface and make it to the board. Slowly, her gaze flicked down to the water beneath her, searching for the shark, but it had disappeared. The surface was deceptively calm, giving no indication of the predator lurking beneath. Her breathing quickened as she finally managed to push herself closer to the board. She could almost reach the side, but then, out of nowhere, the water around her shifted with a sudden violence. A wave of panic hit her chest as the shark broke through the water with horrifying force, its massive jaws opening wide, just inches away from her. The world seemed to slow as Emily saw the rows of razor-sharp teeth glistening, the jaws of the beast closing in with frightening precision. She had no time to think, only to react. "No!" she screamed as she instinctively kicked. Her legs, her body jerking backward. The water surged violently, knocking her off balance as the shark lunged toward her. It was a blur of grey and white, the sheer power of its strike leaving her in a state of shock. She felt the water ripple with the force of its approach. The shark's teeth grazed her leg, a searing, blinding pain shooting up her thigh. She cried out, but the noise was drowned by the roar of the ocean, the sound of blood rushing in her ears. Her body went into overdrive, adrenaline flooding her system. She kicked, struggled, and flailed. Her hands scrambled for purchase on the board, and in that moment, she felt like the ocean itself was trying to swallow her whole. Her foot slipped on the board, but with a desperate surge of energy, she managed to grab the edge and hoist herself onto it. She was on the board now, but her legs trembled uncontrollably. Blood mixed with salt water, the sting of the wound on her leg sharp and constant. The shark circled beneath her, its presence still close, as though waiting for her to make a mistake. "Please, please go away," she whispered, her voice trembling, but the words were hollow. The ocean didn't answer. Emily's eyes darted to the shore. The beach was still too far, but she knew she had to get there. Her leg throbbed with every movement, but there was no time to think, no time to feel pain. She had to move. She started, paddling awkwardly at first, her injured leg dragging behind her. The board jerked under her weight as she fought the current, her arms burning with effort. Each stroke felt like a battle against her own body, against the ocean, against the terror that threatened to overwhelm her. The shark did not follow. At least not yet. The minutes stretched into an eternity as she slowly, agonizingly, made her way back toward the shore. Every splash of water sent a chill down her spine. Every noise made her heart race. The sound of her own pulse was deafening in her ears, but the shark did not resurface. It was as if the ocean had swallowed it whole. Her arms burned, and her head began to swim with dizziness. She had no idea how long it had been, but the shore was closer now, the figures of people becoming clearer. She couldn't stop. Not yet. She had to make it. A few more strokes. Just a few more. The shore loomed ahead. and Emily let out a sob of relief as she realized that she was going to make it. She was going to survive. But even as the relief flooded her chest, she knew she would never forget the feeling of the shark's teeth brushing against her skin, of the terror that had gripped her in that instant. She was alive, but she was also changed forever. Emily's heart hammered against her ribcage, every pulse a frantic reminder that time was slipping away. The dorsal fin of the tiger shark cut through the water with eerie precision, a sickening signal that she was no longer alone. The ocean, once a vast and beautiful place, now felt like a prison. The water, usually so peaceful, was a vast, endless trap. Her thoughts screamed at her to move, but her body was frozen. The shark didn't make a sound, and for a brief moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. She glanced at her paddleboard just a few feet away, but the gap between her and safety felt infinite now. The leash tied to her ankle seemed to mock her with its quiet tug, as if pulling her closer to the beast. It's coming closer. She could see the glint of the shark's eyes beneath the water, its body coiling like a predator closing in on its prey. Every muscle in Emily's body screamed for her to act, to swim, to run, but she was paralyzed, her mind locked in a state of disbelief, unable to comprehend the nightmare unfolding just beneath the surface. The shark circled, moving with the silent grace of a seasoned predator. It wasn't just passing through, it was studying her, its movements deliberate and slow. The water around her seemed to darken with each pass. The shark was getting closer. A sound finally broke through her haze of terror, a low, rumbling growl from the depths of the ocean. It wasn't the shark's sound, but something deeper, a pressure that seemed to reverberate through the water and into her bones. It was almost as though the ocean itself was alive, and it was watching. Emily's breath came out in short, panicked bursts. No, I can't die like this," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible above the pounding of her heart. She looked again toward the shore. It felt like it was miles away, even though she knew it was only a short swim. But she couldn't do it, not without her board, and not without the sense of security that the board had always given her. Think, Emily, think. She had taken ocean safety courses, trained herself to stay calm in emergencies, but nothing had prepared her for this. A tiger shark. A predator of the sea, one of the most aggressive species in the world. The shark passed close again, its fin cutting through the water just inches from her body. Emily held her breath, praying it wouldn't get any closer, praying it would leave her alone. But there was no mercy in the way it glided through the water, its eyes fixed on her like a hunter tracking its prey. She had heard the stories of sharks circling before attacking, of swimmers and surfers who had been picked off when they least expected it, and she knew the statistics. Tiger sharks were responsible for a number of attacks along the Hawaiian coast, but those were always other people, the ones she'd heard about in the news or read about online. She never thought it would be her. The shark's body passed beneath her again, close enough that she could almost feel the water ripple from its movement. Her body tensed, her heart leaping into her throat. But then, for a brief moment, it stopped. The water went still. Is it leaving? Emily's gaze flicked toward the shore again, trying to gauge the distance. She couldn't let it go on like this. She couldn't just float there, helpless. It was now or never. She started to swim toward the paddleboard, slowly at first, testing the waters, but then with more purpose as the adrenaline surged through her veins. Her arms cut through the water in frantic strokes, each one more desperate than the last. She could feel the tension in the water, the weight of the shark still lurking beneath, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't. As she neared her board, she saw it again. The shark, rising from below, its sleek body arching as it came for her. No! Her hand reached for the paddleboard, her fingers brushing the smooth surface. The shark lunged from the depths, its jaws opening wide, and for a terrifying moment, Emily thought she wouldn't make it. But just as the shark's mouth neared her leg, the board shifted in the water with a sudden jolt. Her ankle. The leash had caught on something, or perhaps the shark had nudged it, causing it to pull tightly. Emily yanked her leg back, heart pounding in her throat. She scrambled to get her leg out of the water, her body slick with sweat and seawater, but the shark was relentless. It wasn't finished yet. It circled her again, this time closer, its body moving in a more aggressive, predatory fashion. She could see the rows of teeth glinting beneath the surface, could almost feel the power in each movement as it adjusted. Its course to target her. "Please, please, just go away," she cried out, her voice breaking. But the shark didn't care about her pleas. It wasn't interested in her fear. It was driven by hunger, by instinct. She was running out of time. Every second felt like a year, and yet there was no clear way out. The shark was getting closer. The distance between them had closed to almost nothing, and Emily's mind was racing, her thoughts splintering in 1,000 directions. The only thing she knew for sure was that she had to get away, but the board was still too far. Her hands gripped the sides of the paddleboard now, pulling herself up with everything she had left. She kicked hard, forcing her body to follow as she finally pulled herself onto the board with shaking arms. The shark was right there, beneath her. She could feel the water swirling, the ocean alive with its presence. And then, without warning, the shark shot upward from beneath the board with an explosive surge of energy. Its massive jaws opened wide, too wide, so wide that she could almost feel the force of the bite before it even made contact. But Emily's body reacted faster than her thoughts. She threw herself forward, hands grabbing the paddle, thrusting it into the water. She kicked once, twice, her feet kicking off the board, propelling herself toward the shore with every ounce of strength she could muster. The shark gave one final, powerful swipe at the board, its tail cutting through the water in a vicious arc. But Emily was already moving, already swimming as fast as she could. Her mind was a blur, her body shaking with exhaustion, but all she could think about was one thing: getting to safety. A faint cry reached her ears, the distant voice of a lifeguard yelling from the beach. But the world around her was a whirl of water, the pounding of her heart and the fading presence of the shark disappearing into the deep. She was still alive. Just. Emily's blood ran cold as the shark circled once more, its movements deliberate, predatory. The massive dorsal fin cut through the water like a blade, slicing through the calm with terrifying ease. Every time it moved, the water around her seemed to shrink, as if the ocean itself were closing in. Her body tensed in the cold water, unable to move. She tried to control her breathing, but the shallow, frantic gasps betrayed her fear. Focus. Stay calm. The mantra she repeated in her head felt like a weak defense against the overwhelming surge of panic. Her fingers clutched at the leash attached to her ankle, the only connection she had to the paddleboard, her only hope of escape. But it felt miles away. Her body trembled, her muscles frozen in place. The shark's movements were methodical, calculated. It was hunting her. The realization hit her like a wave. There was no escape. She was a floating target in the middle of a predator's domain. Emily's mind flashed to everything she had read or heard about shark behavior. She knew that sharks, especially tiger sharks, could be unpredictable, but there were certain behaviors to watch for. Slow, methodical circling. The shark was sizing her up, determining whether she was a threat or a meal. And the fact that it hadn't attacked yet meant one thing: it was still deciding. Don't let it decide too quickly, she thought desperately. Don't make yourself an easy target. But it was difficult to think with her heartbeat thundering in her ears, her chest tight with fear. The water was murky now, the clarity of the ocean replaced by the shadow of the predator that lurked just below her. Her eyes darted down, searching for any sign of the shark's next move. She didn't want to look, but she had to. A sharp, sudden jolt of movement under her made her snap her head back up to the surface. The shark's dark silhouette shot toward her with terrifying speed. "It's coming for me." Without thinking, Emily kicked, her legs slamming against the water, but it was too late. The shark shot forward with a surge of speed, its body breaking the surface for a split second. She saw its massive, jagged mouth, its rows of teeth glistening in the sun. The sight of it was enough to freeze her. The shark lunged, its jaws open wide, aiming directly at her. Instinct took over. Emily screamed, but the sound was lost in the vast expanse of water. She yanked her body away with every ounce of strength. She had throwing herself to the side in a desperate attempt to avoid the attack. Her heart pounded against her chest, a primal surge of adrenaline flooding her veins. Her hand shot out to grab the leash attached to the paddleboard, and by some miracle she managed to catch it. But the shark wasn't done. It snapped its jaws shut with a force that shook the water around her, missing her by mere inches. Emily gasped, her throat tight with terror. But she didn't have time to process. The predator was already circling back, its body moving in that eerie, controlled rhythm, preparing for another strike. She could feel the pressure of the water around her, the immense power of the shark's movement sending ripples that threatened to drag her down. I have to get back to the board. She tugged at the leash, kicking her legs with everything she had, but the shark wasn't giving her a chance to regroup. It closed the gap between them with terrifying speed, its movements a blur beneath the water. Her heart hammered in her chest as she struggled to pull herself closer to the board, her hand shaking violently as she reached for it. She could feel the pull of the shark's presence, like a magnetic force drawing her down. Her fingers grazed the edge of the board, but the ocean felt too big, too deep, and she was too small. Her muscles screamed from the cold and effort, but her mind had already lost all sense of time. The water was darkening once again, the shadow of the shark weaving through the murky depths. She didn't have much time. She had to act now. With a final, frantic movement, she wrapped her fingers around the edge of the paddleboard and yanked it toward her, pulling herself up with every bit of strength she had left. She kicked furiously, using the last remnants of her strength to get herself on top of the board, her body slamming against it with a splash. She heard the shark's tail swish through the water just behind her, and her heart seemed to stop. She was on the board. Barely. Her limbs were weak from fear and exhaustion, but she was no longer in the water. No longer a helpless target. She took a breath, the salty air filling her lungs. But as she looked over her shoulder, her stomach twisted in horror. The shark was still there, circling just below her. She could see the shadow of its body beneath. The surface moving with unnerving precision. It wasn't leaving. Terror surged in her chest. She had to get back to shore, but the distance felt impossibly far. Her muscles were on fire from the fight, her energy drained from the sheer terror of it all. She glanced toward the shore, looking for help, but the beach was too far, and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore was too distant. There was no one nearby. Her fingers clutched the paddle, but it felt heavy like an anchor. She couldn't get enough leverage to propel herself forward, not with the shark so close. The shark surged toward her again, its body coming closer with every pass. Emily's heart skipped, and in a flash of terror, she realized she had no control. No matter how hard she paddled, no matter how fast she moved, it would be faster. It would catch her. She yanked her paddle into the water with a desperate cry, pushing herself forward. But then the shark was there again, closer, its dorsal fin rising from the water like a dark omen. It was circling her now, waiting, watching. The terror was paralyzing, but Emily's body refused to stop fighting, to stop moving. There had to be a way out, there had to be a chance. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the shark stopped. For a moment, the water was still, deadly still. The shark paused, its body drifting just below the surface as if considering her, deciding. Then, with one final slow movement, it turned. The massive body glided away, its dorsal fin vanishing into the depths. Emily stared at the spot where the shark had been, her mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Her chest heaved, her body trembling with the aftermath of the terror. She had narrowly escaped, but she wasn't sure how, and as the seconds passed, the shark's presence vanished entirely, as though it had never been there at all. Only the still empty water remained. With her heart still racing, Emily began to paddle slowly at first, the movements weak. Each stroke brought her closer to the shore, but her mind couldn't fully release the terror that gripped her. The water still felt alive, the memories of the shark's hunger lingering like a shadow she couldn't shake. As the shore drew nearer, Emily pushed herself harder, her body moving on autopilot now, desperate to escape the hold of the ocean. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The shark's circling was slow, methodical. Emily's body, numb from the cold water and the paralysis of fear, was barely responding. Her eyes never left the beast, the way it glided beneath the surface, its body just a shadow. Beneath the water's darkened sheen, the dorsal fin moved in small arcs, appearing and disappearing like the warning of an incoming storm. Every pass brought the predator closer, a chilling reminder that there was nowhere to run. The water around her felt thick, oppressive. With each passing moment, her grip on her sanity seemed to slip further, the terror rising in her chest like an uncontrollable tide. She clung to the leash of her paddleboard, the small, feeble connection to safety, but it felt more like a rope pulling her toward a certain death. Her breathing was shallow now, fast and panicked. Think, Emily. Think. She couldn't afford to. Let herself slip into a state of panic, but the weight of reality was suffocating. There was no one else around, no one to hear her cries for help. The beach, once so inviting, now felt impossibly distant, and the surfers she had seen earlier were invisible from where she floated. She was alone, isolated in the vastness of the ocean. Then, the shark moved closer. The change in the water was subtle at first, but it sent a shock of terror through Emily's body. She froze, holding her breath, waiting. Her eyes followed the dark shape beneath the surface. It's coming for me. She could feel it now, that gnawing, undeniable certainty that the shark had locked in on her. It was no longer just circling, it was stalking. Its body was closer now, just beneath her, its tail flicking lazily from side to side in the way sharks do when they prepare to strike. The water, once clear, now felt murky, distorted. Emily's mind reeled for something to hold on to, some rational thought that might pull her out of the spiraling fear. She glanced at the shore again. The beach was a distant, unreachable memory. There was no way she could make it. Focus on the board, Emily, just focus on the board. She turned her gaze back to her paddleboard, her fingers tightening around the leash that still tethered her to it. The distance between her and safety was still minimal, just a few feet, but it might as well have been miles. The shark had closed the gap, its shadow looming large beneath her. She could feel its presence, feel the weight of its stare even though she couldn't see its eyes. She knew what it was capable of, the stories she had heard, the warnings. They were all real now. She wasn't just imagining this. Her heart pounded in her chest, a slow, deep thud that reverberated through her entire body. Please, please let me make it out of here, she thought desperately. She dared not move too suddenly. Every instinct told her to stay as still as possible, to not provoke the beast, as don't make it curious, don't make it attack. But then, with the swiftness of a strike, the shark darted forward. The water exploded beneath her feet as the creature surged upward. Emily's entire world went into slow motion as the massive shape shot toward her. Jaws wide, teeth gleaming in the sunlight as it breached the surface. She didn't have time to scream. She didn't have time to react. With terrifying force, the shark's mouth clamped down on her leg. The pain was excruciating, a sharp, white-hot sensation that coursed through her body. She screamed, her voice caught in her throat as she thrashed, trying to escape the force of the shark's jaws. The board slipped from her grasp as the shark shook her violently, tossing her like a rag doll in its grip. Her vision blurred with pain and shock. She couldn't think, couldn't comprehend what was happening, only the searing agony of its bite. In that moment, survival instincts kicked in. She needed to escape. She needed to get free. Her hands scrambled, reaching for the board, her fingers slick with blood. Her mind screamed for her to move, but her leg was locked in the shark's grip. The creature's teeth sinking deeper into her flesh with each violent shake. She kicked out with her other leg, but the shark didn't release her. It pulled harder, dragging her through the water with terrifying strength. The world was spinning. The pain was overwhelming, blinding. She was drowning in it, the water mixing with the blood that was rapidly staining the ocean around her. She could feel the shark's power, its primal hunger, its relentless drive to take what it had set its sights on. But then, just as she thought, she could no longer endure. The shark released its grip. The sudden loss of pressure sent her tumbling, spinning in the water. For a moment, all she could hear was the rush of blood in her ears and the deafening silence of the ocean around her. Is cool. Egon? Emily didn't know if it was a trick, if the shark was circling back in for another strike, but she didn't have the strength to stay still. She couldn't even stay afloat. Her body was broken, her leg torn open by the shark's jaws, and her chest was burning from the strain of the panic. Then, in the chaos of her own thoughts, something miraculous happened. The sound of a distant motor pierced through the fog of her terror. the faint hum of a boat engine. "Help!" she screamed, her voice hoarse and desperate, but the sound barely reached the surface of the ocean. Her throat burned, but she didn't care. She had to be heard. She had to be found. Her head swam, the world around her dizzy and unsteady. She tried to move, to swim toward the sound of the motor, but her body was weakening. Every movement sent shockwaves of pain through her leg, and the blood in the water only made her feel more vulnerable. But the sound grew louder, closer. The boat. Someone had heard her. Her vision blurred at the edges, the darkness creeping in, around her. She clung to the faint hope that she wasn't going to die out here. Not like this. And then finally the boat came into view, a small fishing vessel, its engine sputtering as it pulled closer. "Hey, are you okay?" A voice rang out, a lifeguard or someone from the shore, but Emily could barely comprehend it. She was slipping. The world was fading. Her leg, bleeding and torn, felt numb, and the cold water soaked through her clothing, dragging her deeper into unconsciousness. With a final, desperate cry, Emily reached out, and then the boat was beside. The last thing Emily remembered was the hands pulling her aboard, the steady voice of the rescuer, urging her to stay awake, and then the roar of the engine as they sped back toward the shore. The pain was still there, gnawing at her leg, but the terror had finally begun to fade. The shark was gone. The attack was over, but the scars, both physical and mental, would remain forever. The shark was right there. Emily could feel it, even before her eyes locked onto the massive shape beneath the water. It was moving faster now, almost as if it had made a decision. Her heart lurched in her chest, her body too stiff to respond, as if frozen in time. The ocean, which moments ago had been a vast and serene expanse, now felt like a trap, and she was the prey. Every instinct screamed at her to act, to do something, anything, but her mind felt clouded, her body incapable of movement. "Just keep your head above water. Just keep your head above water." She repeated the mantra in her mind, but it did nothing to quell the rising terror. The water seemed to grow darker, the surface almost black as the shark's shadow loomed closer. Emily's chest tightened, her breath shallow and desperate. Her paddleboard was only a few feet away, but it might as well have been a mile. Every attempt to move toward it felt like wading through cement, and then, without warning, the shark struck. It happened too quickly for her to react. One moment the water was calm, and the next there was a rush of movement, a violent explosion of force from beneath the surface. The shark's massive jaws snapped shut around her leg with a sickening crunch. The pain was instant, blinding, and overwhelming. It felt like a vice had clamped down on her, the pressure so intense that she couldn't breathe. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the water. The world suddenly a cacophony of bubbles, sloshing waves, and her own screams muffled in the depths. Her mind was in a fog, the pain so sharp it was all-consuming, but she instinctively began kicking, thrashing with whatever strength she could muster. She could feel the powerful pull of the shark, its teeth grinding against her flesh, its body massive and unrelenting. The force of the bite jerked her body to the side, tearing through the muscles and skin of her thigh, the blood mixing with the seawater, staining it a deep, unnatural red. "No!" she screamed, though the words were barely audible through the water. The shark didn't release her. It was dragging her down, and for a moment she thought she might drown, the waves crashing over her head, the world spinning. But somehow her mind snapped back into focus, her fight-or-flight instincts kicking in. She couldn't let it drag her deeper. Not now. Not like this. With every ounce of strength, she managed to free one of her legs, kicking violently in a desperate bid to dislodge the predator. But it was no use. The shark's jaws were locked around her leg and its grip was unyielding. Every movement she made only caused more pain, the tendons and ligaments of her legs screaming in protest. A surge of adrenaline coursed through her, blurring the pain for a moment. Her hands reached out frantically, searching for something, anything. The board was so close, yet so far away. It felt as though the water itself was pushing her away from it, dragging her further into the abyss. "Help! Help!" she screamed again, her voice barely a whisper in the chaos of the ocean. But the beach was miles away, the distant figures of surfers oblivious to her plight. In the moments that followed, everything seemed to blur together. The dark shape of the shark beneath her, its endless circling, and the overwhelming pressure in her leg. Her vision started to narrow, the blood loss clouding her mind. The weight of the water, the pull of the shark, the relentless pain. It was all becoming too much. Suddenly, as if responding to her frantic movements, the shark jerked back. Emily's body was thrown violently into the water as the shark released. Her leg, its massive body vanishing beneath the surface in a blur of motion. The pain in her leg was excruciating, a fire that seemed to spread through her entire body, but it was nothing compared to the shock of what had just happened. She floated, dazed and disoriented, unable to comprehend the sudden silence that followed the attack. The water around her was clouded with blood, her own blood, the sea a disorienting wash of red and blue. She looked down at her leg. The damage was severe. She could see the jagged, torn skin, the deep gashes, and the blood that seemed to flow freely, mixing with the water around her. It felt like it was happening to someone else. She couldn't process it. She couldn't process anything. Get to the board. Get to the board. Now. The thought was like a lifeline. Her body screamed in protest as she kicked with her remaining leg, trying to propel herself toward the paddleboard. It seemed so close, yet impossibly far. Every stroke was met with the sharp, biting pain in her leg, each movement sending waves of agony through her, but she kept moving, keeping her focus on that single point of safety. Don't think about the blood. Don't think about the shark, just get to the board. Finally, her fingers brushed the edge of the board. The relief was overwhelming, though it was short-lived. She pulled herself onto the board, the pain in her leg intensifying, as the movement jarred her. The board rocked beneath her, but she didn't care. She was on it. She was safe, at least for the moment. She lay there, panting, her body shaking uncontrollably from the cold, from the shock, from the pain. Her leg throbbed with every beat of her heart, and her chest was tight, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The shark had disappeared beneath the waves, but the terror still clung to her like a suffocating blanket. Every second she expected it to return, its massive body rising from the depths once more, but there was nothing. The water around her was still, almost eerily quiet. The only sounds were the distant crash of the surf against the shore and the harsh, rasping breath she took as she fought to stay conscious. Stay awake. Stay conscious. Help is coming. She didn't know how she knew that. Maybe it was just the faint hope that clung to her mind like a desperate thread. But she didn't have time to wonder. She needed help, and she needed it fast. With her remaining strength, she grabbed the paddle and began to slowly push herself toward the shore. It was all she could do. Her leg was useless, heavy with pain and blood, but she forced herself to keep moving, the slow, laborious strokes taking her closer to the beach, closer to safety, closer to survival. She didn't know how much time had passed. It felt like hours. Her vision swam in and out of focus, and she felt herself slipping, her body fighting against the shock and the blood loss. But still, she paddled. Help is coming. Help is coming. The thought repeated in her mind like a prayer as she fought against the darkening water, the ocean that had tried to swallow her whole. The pain was excruciating, immediate, and unrelenting. Emily's mind registered it with a kind of horrified disbelief. The sharp, crushing force of the shark's jaws sinking into her leg, its teeth serrated and biting down with terrifying precision. She felt the blood, warm and hot, rushing from the wound, mixing with the salt water as she kicked and thrashed in the water. She screamed, but the sound was muffled by the surge of water and the panic that clogged her throat. Her leg, where the shark had latched on, felt like it was being crushed in a vice, each jagged tooth tearing into muscle and flesh. The shock was so sudden that she didn't even know what to do, where to go. Her body went into a kind of survival mode, reacting on instinct. She grabbed at her leg, trying to push the shark away, but the animal was too strong, too relentless. The water around her turned a dark red as she kicked frantically, fighting, twisting, and yanking to free herself. God, it's happening. It's real. Her thoughts were chaotic, unrecognizable from the cold, raw fear flooding her body. She glanced at her paddleboard, her only means of survival, but it seemed impossibly far. The shark wouldn't let her get close, not now. It was like the predator had claimed its hold on her and was determined to finish the job. The pain was unbearable, and her muscles screamed for her to stop moving, to conserve energy. But Emily couldn't. She couldn't stop fighting. She couldn't accept what was happening to her. "Help, somebody, help!" She managed to scream, her voice raw with panic, but the words felt as though they were lost in the vastness of the ocean. Her eyes darted toward the shore, but it was too far. The people on the beach were mere specks now, and her cries for help would never reach them in time. The shark's grip tightened. In a blur of instinct, Emily brought both hands down hard on the shark's head, pushing, trying to break free, trying to make the creature let go. She kicked with all the strength she had left, her foot striking its side, but the shark only twisted, undeterred. The sudden lurch of its body caused her leg to tear, the pain amplifying with every movement. She felt herself being dragged, pulled deeper into the water. Her breath came in shallow, desperate gasps. She couldn't see where the shark was now, but she felt the unmistakable sense of it circling again, waiting for the moment to strike once more. Her leg felt like a foreign object, so far gone from the rest of her body, as if it no longer belonged to her. Blood was pooling around her, staining the water, but the ocean seemed to swallow it whole, hiding her suffering beneath its waves. She didn't know how much longer she could hold on. Then, finally, something inside her snapped. Adrenaline surged through her veins as her body, fueled by pure survival instinct, surged with a new strength she hadn't known she possessed. She screamed again, more from frustration than pain, and with a force she didn't know she had, she jerked her leg free from the shark's grip. For one brief moment, she was free, no longer held in the shark's jaws, but the freedom came with a cost. Her leg felt numb, almost completely useless as she tried to paddle toward the board. She could hear the shark behind her, the sound of water slicing through the depths, but she couldn't look back. She had to focus on getting away, on getting back to safety. With each stroke, her body screamed in agony. Her leg was useless now, hanging limp and bloody beneath her as she kicked weakly to stay afloat. The sea around her felt cold, alien. It pressed in from every side, a silent reminder of how insignificant she was in its vast expanse. She could feel the weight of the ocean, the pressure of the water closing in on her. She glanced at the shore again. Too far. The voices from the beach were now nothing more than a distant hum, and then, as if summoned by her worst fears, she heard it again. The shark. The water seemed to darken as it appeared once more, a blur beneath her, a shadow of death in the depths. The shark was circling her again, moving with deliberate precision, its body cutting through the water with terrifying grace. She didn't dare look down. She could feel its presence, its hunger, coiling beneath her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. The pain in her leg was intense, but the urgency of the situation forced her to push through. She reached for the paddleboard again, her hand trembling as she grabbed the leash with all the strength she could muster. The shark was closing in fast. She could hear the sound of it speeding through the water, a sickening rush of power. It was too quick, too fast. She pulled herself up onto the board, trying to ignore the scream of pain from her leg. Her fingers slipped on the wet surface, and for a heart-stopping second, she thought she might fall again. But she managed to secure herself, her face grimacing as she used every ounce of strength to stay on. "I'm not going to die here. I'm not going to die." Her thoughts were frantic, but she kept them focused. She needed to paddle, she needed to get away, she needed to move faster than the shark could follow. Her arms burned from the exertion, her leg hanging useless and heavy beneath her. The blood had slowed, but the wound was raw, an open gash that felt like it might tear apart at any moment. The shark was closer now, the fin rising from the water in an unmistakable arc. "Please, please." Her whisper of a plea was drowned by the sound of water slapping against the board. The shark's dorsal fin sliced the water, getting closer. It was gaining on her. Think. She had to outpace it. She had to be smarter. She wasn't a professional swimmer, but she knew the water and she knew this shore. She couldn't give up, not now, not when she was so close. The shark was just behind her, but she could see a slight change in its movement. It was following her, yes, but it was more cautious now, more tentative. Maybe it had been thrown off by her sudden attempt to escape. Maybe it was just sizing her up again, trying to figure out how much more of a fight she could give. Emily paddled harder, her strokes frantic, her leg dragging behind her. The pain was nearly unbearable, but her determination burned hotter than the agony in her leg. She focused on one thing: the shore. The tiny figures on the beach were now becoming more distinct, real people who could help her. She was so close she could almost taste the safety of the land beneath her feet. Then, just as the shark moved in for another strike, a sound reached her ears. A motor, the faint rumble of an engine, a rescue boat, its outline growing clearer. As it neared her, she could barely make it out through the splashing water, but there was no mistaking the speed it was traveling. With a final surge of adrenaline, Emily reached forward, pulling herself faster toward the boat. The shark, sensing the change in her movements, veered off, disappearing back into the depths from which it had emerged. It was done, for now. The boat was close enough now that Emily could see the faces of the rescuers on board. 2 men, their expressions hard and focused, their arms reaching out to her. She didn't even feel the hands grabbing her, pulling her from the water. She didn't feel the sting of her wounds as they hoisted her up onto the boat. All she felt was relief. The shark was gone. She was safe. For now. The pain was unbearable. But the fight for survival had stripped away all thoughts of agony. Emily's vision was blurry, her head spinning from both fear and blood loss. The shark had released her leg for a moment, but it was only to reposition itself, circling again beneath the surface. The water was thick with red, the blood pouring from her leg and clouding around her like a warning. Her body was so cold now, the shock of the attack, the loss of blood, and the cold ocean water numbing her senses. But she couldn't afford to think about that. Not now. Not while the shark was still circling, waiting for another chance. Her chest heaved as she treading. Water. Each breath a desperate gasp, each movement more sluggish than the last. She could still hear the distant crash of waves against the shore, but it felt like they were worlds away. The shore was unreachable. The shark, like some malicious force of nature, had seen to that. She was alone. Utterly alone. She knew she had moments, maybe seconds, before it came back for her. Focus, Emily, focus. What do I do? What do I do? Her paddleboard was still in sight, drifting lazily with the current. The leash around her ankle tugged at her, but her body felt too weak to swim toward it. She couldn't take her eyes off the water, couldn't risk not seeing the shark when it attacked. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest, but there was no time for that. She had to move. She had to act. Suddenly, the water around her shifted again. Emily's heart skipped a beat. The shark's fin reappeared, gliding above the surface in a slow, deliberate arc. It was coming for her again. This time it was closer. It was patient, calculating, as though it knew the final strike was near. Her leg throbbed with every heartbeat, a constant reminder of the savage wound the shark had left. She looked down at the blood mixing with the water around her, and her stomach churned. There was no way to stop it now. Every thought, every instinct was pushing her toward the same singular goal: survival. But how? What could she do to make it out of this alive? Her mind raced, frantic, looking for anything that might give her a chance. And then, through the haze of panic and pain, an idea sparked. The board. The paddle. I need to use the paddle. She glanced toward the paddleboard again, but the shark circling was closer now. The fin cut through the water at a menacing pace, its approach steady and unhurried. She was running out of time. With every ounce of strength she had left, Emily pushed off from the water with her good leg, trying to swim toward the board. Her muscles screamed, but she gritted her teeth and kept going. The current tugged at her, but she kicked harder, ignoring the throb of pain in her leg. The water around her churned as she moved, the blood mixing with the sea, staining the surface as if marking her as prey. The shark circled once more. Its movements were fast now, deliberate, and Emily's heart raced as she pushed harder, trying to get closer to the paddleboard. She was almost there. She could almost reach it. Don't stop, don't stop. Her hands grabbed the edge of the board and she hauled herself up with what little strength she had left. The leash tugged at her ankle, pulling her back into the water, but she managed to keep her grip on the board. She was on it now, but only just. The board rocked beneath her, unsteady in the choppy water, and the shark was so close now, its shadow looming beneath her. Her breathing was frantic, shallow, as she scrambled to find her balance. The shark's fins sliced through the water again, a chilling reminder of how little time she had. It was coming for her. She couldn't waste another second. Emily grabbed, the paddle now feeling like it was a lifeline, though it had never seemed so heavy before. The shark was just beneath her, and she knew this would be her only chance. She pushed the board forward, moving as fast as she could with one leg useless. Each stroke of the paddle felt like a lifetime. And then, in the blur of panic, the desperate thrum of her pulse in her ears, she saw it, the shadow beneath the water. The shark's sleek body was almost at the surface. Emily swung the paddle, striking the water with all her remaining strength. It was a wild swing, almost desperate, but she managed to hit the shark just beneath the surface. The force of the blow made a sharp sound as it connected, sending a jolt of pain through her arm. The shark recoiled, its body twisting in the water, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. The world held its breath. Emily's heart was pounding, her chest heaving as she fought to stay on the board. But the shark was far from finished. It darted toward her, its movement faster now, fueled by hunger and the sense that the moment had come. Emily's vision blurred again as panic swept over her, but she held onto the paddle with a grip that felt almost unnatural. The shark closed the distance, and she swung again, this time with both hands, the paddle cutting through the water, like a weapon. The shark was closing in fast. Emily's hands were shaking as she swung once more, but the predator was too fast. The water around her churned violently, and for a moment she felt its jaws just inches away from her body. And then, just as she thought it was too late, the sound of a boat engine roared through the air. Emily's heart skipped. She heard voices shouting, frantic and distant. The sound of a motor grew louder, closer, and the shark hesitated. For a split second, its movement slowed, its dark eyes still focused on her, but the boat was almost there. The shark, sensing the approaching threat, veered away with a sudden burst of speed, disappearing into the depths below. Emily collapsed onto her board, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and relief. The sound of the boat grew louder, and soon the hull of the rescue vessel appeared, cutting through the waves like a beacon of salvation. She couldn't believe it. She was alive. 2 men from the boat jumped into the water, pulling her onto the deck with a force that left her gasping for breath. They didn't ask questions at first. One of them immediately began applying pressure to her leg, which was still bleeding profusely. Emily could barely comprehend what was happening. She felt like her mind had stopped functioning. She could barely hear their voices over the ringing in her ears, the pulsing, dizzying effects of shock. "You're gonna be okay," one of the men said, his voice low and calm despite the frantic urgency in his movements. "You're gonna be okay. Just hold on." Emily nodded weakly, the words barely registering in her foggy brain. The last thing she saw before the darkness crept in was the shoreline in the distance, the faint figures of people who had no idea how close they had come to losing one of their own. And then the world went quiet.